What do you do when your partner is being difficult? How do you make them stop doing something that is annoying or hurtful? How do you make someone address their issues? Issues that get in the way of you having a good relationship with them. Maybe you've had questions like these too. Hi, I'm Michael Clark with the Ananias Foundation. In this video, we're going to answer these important questions by discussing a concept called boundaries. We'll cover some principles of relationship boundaries so you know what good boundaries look like. We'll discuss how to create and maintain healthy boundaries that will help you enjoy a good relationship with your partner and others. Finally, we'll talk about how to get better at using boundaries if you are a person who has tended to overstep others' boundaries, or if you're someone who has allowed others to overstep yours. If you want to stop causing harm in your relationships, you're on the right path. This is Journey of Change, a video series to help you become the safe, loving partner you were meant to be. Before I start our discussion about relationship boundaries, I want to give credit to a couple of psychologists, Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, who have maybe done the best job of making this concept understandable and easy to apply in real life. I'll draw on their work heavily in this video, and I want to encourage you to check out their best-selling book titled Boundaries and other related resources you can find on their website. Let's begin by getting a better understanding of the principle of relationship boundaries. Doctors Cloud and Townsend would tell you that relationship boundaries are a lot like property boundaries. You know, when you own a piece of property, there are certain rights and responsibilities that come with that ownership. The rights part of property ownership means I get to decide many things about my property. For example, what color to paint my house, what kind of furniture I want on the patio, and so on. You could tell me what you think I should do with my property, such as paint my house blue, but I don't have to do what you say because it's my property. The responsibility part of my property means, however, that I'm responsible for what happens inside my property boundary. If a windstorm comes along and blows off the roof of my house, I'm responsible for fixing it, not you. My rights and responsibilities start and end at my property line. Now, as my neighbor, your rights and responsibilities start and end with your property boundaries. Okay, let's switch over and apply these concepts to relationships. Within a relationship, having boundaries means recognizing that everyone is an independent, autonomous, separate person with different wants, needs, thoughts, and feelings. What I get to control starts and ends with me. This means I get to make decisions about all kinds of things related to me, like what I do, what I say, and how I spend my time. Boundaries, when applied to people, also means I'm responsible for my thoughts, feelings, words, and actions. Likewise, what you are in control of starts and ends with you. You get to make decisions about all kinds of things related to you, like your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, while at the same time, you're responsible for your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions. Think of it like there's a bubble surrounding each of us, and we are each in control of and responsible for everything that happens inside that bubble. Simple enough, right? Let's get more specific about what this means, what those healthy boundaries in a relationship look like. If you have good relationship boundaries, it means you and your partner will each make decisions on your own. You'll have friends and interests and hobbies outside of the relationship, and you'll each be okay with that status. You get to decide what you wear, who you talk to, and how you spend your time and money. Your partner also gets to decide what they wear, who they talk to, and how they spend their time and money. It means that you may ask your partner for what you need or want, but you must accept that your partner might not always give it to you. In other words, they have the right to say no. When you have a problem, they may or may not be willing or able to fix it. When you're feeling down or anxious, they may help you feel better, but they may not, because they're unable or unwilling to help you manage these emotions. In both cases, your problems and your feelings are your responsibility. While boundaries tell us that each of us gets to make the decision for our own life, good boundaries allow us to try to influence others and for them to try to influence us. You may weigh in on your partner's choices, and they may be influenced by your opinions. But ultimately, they get to decide for themselves what's best for them. Likewise, they can try to inform or influence you, but you get to decide on what's best for you. The key to maintaining good boundaries is knowing when we go beyond mere information and influence and we push too hard for what we want in an attempt to control the other person. I want to acknowledge that relationship boundaries can feel uncomfortable for many of us. Many of our parents didn't model good relationship boundaries in their relationship with each other, or maybe with you. So the concept may feel foreign. Another reason why boundaries may seem odd is this false narrative we've often heard about relationships. Hey, isn't our partner supposed to become one with us and anticipate our needs? Be everything we need to make us happy? And won't all of this independence inside a relationship just destroy the close connection we want? The answer to all of these questions is no. Relying on our partner to meet all our emotional needs is not realistic, and it's not sustainable. First, they'll never get it exactly right because they can't read our minds. Second, if we try to make them take care of those emotional needs, say by pressuring them, they'll soon become resentful. When we expect another person to make us feel better or secure or happy, we're really giving away our power. Why would we want to give someone else, like our partner, the power and the responsibility for us to feel good? We're only setting ourselves up for disappointment and creating conflict when we expect that much of our partners. Relationship boundaries can feel especially uncomfortable when our partner's actions affect us. I mentioned earlier about needing to accept that our partner may choose to or be unable to give us what we ask for. That notion is uncomfortable for us too. It can feel like our relationship is out of our control. It feels that way, because it is out of our control. Remember, we're part of a relationship, but we don't control it. Just like one homeowner is part of their neighborhood, but they don't control everything that happens in it. With these relationship boundary principles in mind, let's go back to the questions I asked at the very beginning of this video. What do you do when your partner is being difficult? How do you make them stop doing something that is annoying or hurtful? How do you make someone address their issues that get in the way of you having a good relationship with them? Hopefully, you now know the answer is that we can't make someone do something, and we would be overstepping our boundaries if we try. However, That doesn't mean we are left helpless and hopeless, suffering from all kinds of mistreatment from others. The answer lies in creating healthy relationship boundaries. Let's look at how we do this. The first step in boundary setting is to figure out if the thing that's bothering us is something we should set a boundary for. When you find yourself annoyed by another person and tempted to control or change them, start by checking yourself to see if you are being overly sensitive or too easily annoyed. You might want to brainstorm how you can think about the situation differently so you aren't as bothered by their actions. Often we'll realize that we're not as affected by their bad habits or poor choices as we thought we were. If you're not sure, this might be a good time to check in with a third party, say a counselor, pastor, or wise yet neutral friend. Now, let's say you determine their actions really are something that you find to be unacceptable. Say, for example, your partner has a tendency to yell during an argument, and you are not okay with that behavior. The next step for using boundaries is for you to communicate to them what you want them to change. In our example, you tell them that yelling during conflicts is not okay with you and ask them to not yell at you when they are upset. Preferably, talk to them about the issue at a time when the two of you are not already in an argument. Using I statements instead of blaming language will help. For example, instead of saying, "You have to stop yelling at me," try saying, "I feel anxious when I'm yelled at, and it makes it harder for me to respond appropriately." The shift in language is subtle, but it can make a big difference in reducing the listener's defensiveness. Now, it would be great if all we need to do is communicate what we find bothersome, and our partners would immediately make adjustments so we no longer experience it. Realistically, this seldom happens. Then what do you do? Here are a couple of paths you might take, depending upon what you've learned about their willingness to change. If they're receptive to doing the things differently, and you see that they are trying, you may want to be patient and even encouraging, perhaps with a few gentle reminders while they are forming a new habit. On the other hand, if they make no real commitment to change and they continue to do what you've asked them not to, then what do you do? The next step in this process is to tell them what you will do in response if they continue to violate your boundary. In almost every case, your response to another person's hurtful behavior will be some form of removing yourself, at least temporarily, from the situation. Note, it's not telling them what they must do. This is not about controlling them, which would be violating a boundary. It's about you responding in a natural, reasonable, and appropriate way. Think of it like you are deciding who and what you are letting into your life and into your property. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with conditions. They say you can come close, but only in ways that are safe and respectful. Now back to our example about the partner who yells during an argument. A reasonable and appropriate consequence might be that you will discontinue the discussion and leave the room. You're not telling them that they must stop yelling. You are just simply informing them that you won't be there to listen to it if they do continue to yell. I encourage you to plan your response ahead of time. Again, it might be helpful to check with an independent third party, like that counselor, pastor, or wise and trusted friend, to verify that your planned response is indeed a natural, reasonable, and appropriate one. For example, I would tell you that walking out of the room would be a reasonable and appropriate response, where Punching them in the throat would not. Make sure your response is not getting them back for what they are doing or giving them a taste of their own medicine, resorting to dirty fighting, or using violence. We often think in the moment that these strategies will work, but they seldom yield good long-term results. The too strong or equally harmful reaction will only put the focus on your hurtful actions and make it way too easy for them and everyone else to miss the original offense which started your boundary setting. Here's an important insight. Taking the high road with a reasonable and appropriate response maximizes the pressure you put on the other person to change. Often they'll know they are the only ones behaving badly. Well, this strategy doesn't guarantee the other person will examine their behavior and change. It gives you the best chance for a positive outcome. I'll say too, there is no one-size-fits-all reasonable and appropriate response. If what they are doing is mildly annoying or counterproductive to the two of you having a good relationship, like raising their voice, a few minutes in the other room might adequately deliver the message that their behavior is not okay. On the other hand, if your partner is being physically violent toward you, reasonable and appropriate may mean you leave immediately to keep yourself safe and only consider reuniting if and when you're sure they've permanently changed their behavior. Your response may also depend on the relationship you have with that person. Counselor and author Casey Davis says to think about what you feel you owe the relationship and consider your history with that person. How long have you known them? What are your obligations and responsibilities to them? For example, if someone stands you up on a first date, you're not obligated to give that person a second chance. On the other hand, if your mother stands you up for lunch, never speaking to her again would be an overreaction. Note that setting boundaries in a relationship often takes time to be effective. You may need to implement your response more than one time to help them develop new habits and new ways of acting. Boundaries are a tool you use to teach others how to treat you. The key is for you to be consistent. Otherwise, you send the message that you weren't serious about your boundary. One of the greatest challenges of boundary setting is boundary pushback. Often, the person whose unacceptable behavior we're trying to limit will actively resist our efforts. Instead of recognizing the need for change, they may push back, even push back hard on our request with anger, guilt trips, denial, and even emotional manipulation. For example, maybe your partner will say, "Your plan is stupid," or they'll claim it's unreasonable that no one could be expected to act the way that you were expecting if they were upset. Maybe they'll accuse you that going to the next room is just your way of not listening to them and avoiding responsibility when you've pissed them off. Perhaps they'll say you're being a hypocrite because you haven't always remained calm when you were upset in the past. Their pushback may include begging, rationalizing, playing the victim, escalating the conflict, or giving you the silent treatment. Anything to avoid respecting the boundary. Do you see how difficult boundary pushback can be? Some insight here. Subconsciously, the person is trying to get you, the boundary setter, to not set this limit. I say subconsciously because they may not even be aware of their motive. Their pushback is likely coming from their own psychological discomfort and not anything you did wrong in setting the boundary. Their resistance also doesn't mean that they are evil or uncaring. It may mean they don't know how to handle the shift in your interactions. However, it's also not your job to rescue them from their discomfort. In fact, It would be counterproductive if you did. When you experience pushback on your legitimate boundaries, it's easy to begin to wonder whether boundary setting was even the right thing to do, or if you were better off dealing with the original behavior you found unacceptable. Remember why you're setting limits: to reduce your anxiety, resentment, confusion, and exhaustion, things that are essential for your well being and for you to have a healthy relationship with the other person. So, what can you do to respond to boundary pushback? Here are some practical steps for dealing with resistance to boundaries while taking care of yourself. First, anticipate boundary pushback. Then, when it happens, you're not surprised and you won't let it derail your steadfastness in setting the boundary. Second, stay calm. Reiterate your expectations in a calm, neutral tone. Doing so without resorting to aggressive communication is powerful. It keeps the focus on the issue rather than on your delivery. Third, use clear, short responses. For example, say, "I understand you're upset right now, but I still need that space that's free from yelling or insults." Fourth, hold to your consequences. Follow through on what you said you'd do if they violate the boundary. Fifth, don't feel guilty. If your partner tries to guilt you, remind yourself that setting a boundary is not unkind or wrong. You are not responsible for their emotions. It's possible to both care about someone and still say no. Sixth, refuse to engage in power games. If you're met with the silent treatment, sarcasm, or some other form of dirty fighting, don't react or retaliate, which will just escalate the conflict. Instead, calmly say, "I'm ready to talk when you're willing to do so respectfully." And then disengage. Seventh, seek support. If the pushback is intense, talk to a therapist or someone in your support network. You may need validation and help reinforcing your limits. Finally, know when to step back further. If they violate your boundaries repeatedly, consider whether you need greater distance from the relationship. Chronic disrespect is a red flag. In extreme situations, prioritizing your emotional or physical safety might mean stepping away entirely. Before we leave this discussion about boundaries, it's good for us to look at how we show up in our relationships. If you recognize that you have tended to overstep your boundaries, that you've been putting too much pressure on your partner to act a certain way, what can you do to change? Start by recognizing what's in your domain and what's outside of it. It's actually very liberating to realize that there's only one thing that we can have the ability to control, which is ourselves. Then, if you determine there is an issue you need to address with your partner, follow the steps we've covered, taking care not to push too hard. Maybe you are on the other end of the spectrum and you're someone who lets others overstep your boundaries. What can you do to change so you show up in your relationship in a healthier way? A good starting point is to remember that you are not a doormat. You do not and should not just let your neighbor, boss, partner walk all over you. You're not doing the other person any favors by tolerating and therefore enabling their bad behavior. And you're certainly not taking good care of yourself by putting up with treatment that is unacceptable. Again, take the steps to communicate what behavior is not okay with you, then follow the other steps we've just covered. The key for you will probably be to remain firm and consistent with your boundaries. It's also helpful to look at where these behavior tendencies come from. Healthy relationship boundaries start with having a good sense of personal security and self-esteem, a characteristic that is usually developed early in life. But certain childhood experiences can leave us with a weak sense of safety, identity, and self-worth. As a result, we also end up with a poor sense of boundaries. Some of us feel like we need our loved one to say or do certain things in order for us to maintain our sense of stability. If they think, talk, or act differently than what we want, we feel off balance and uncomfortable. In response to our discomfort, we often try to bring them back into line. In other words, we try to control them with things like anger, guilt tripping, or manipulation so we can feel safe and secure again. This coping method may work in the moment, but it's a terrible habit that will only result in resentment by the people we are controlling and ultimately destroy the relationship. Now, others of us allow our loved ones to disrespect our boundaries by treating us poorly or making their problems our problem because we need the relationship to feel secure. We don't say no to unacceptable behavior because we're too afraid of losing our connection with that person. We tolerate their hurtful words and actions because the alternative of not having that person in our life triggers terrible anxiety within us and makes us feel unlovable. Notice that in both cases, the key word is need. Needing our partner to behave in certain ways or needing to be in a relationship to feel okay sets us up for trouble. In contrast, having a solid sense of self-esteem frees us to want a relationship and fully enjoy the blessings it brings, but not to fall into the downsides that go with poor relationship boundaries. The single most important factor for having good relationship boundaries is to make sure we show up in that relationship with a positive view of ourselves or positive self-esteem. This may mean addressing some identity issues you're carrying around, such as doubts about your lovability, value, and worthiness. By the way, working with a counselor can be a huge help in addressing poor self-esteem. I'm Michael Clark with the Ananias Foundation, and I hope you found this discussion about boundaries in a relationship to be helpful. Take care, and I'll see you in another video. Thanks for joining me today. I'm honored to be on this journey of change with you, and I hope I've helped you in some way. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you. Also, be sure to hit the like button, share this with others who might find it helpful, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future videos. For more resources, head to our website, ananiasfoundation.org. Until next time, take care and remember, change is possible.